Hello, and welcome to our 8th annual LASE Insight Series workshop. So glad to see you, and virtually. Welcome. My name is Jackie Smith, and I am the Executive Director of LASE Specialized Education. We are a collaborative and innovative educational program that helps students with special learning needs reach their God-given potential. Today, LASE is honored to partner with Lutheran schools across the state to provide insights, strategies, and interventions for children who struggle with anxiety. This workshop is meant to be interactive. It's meant to create dialogue and rich discussion among educators, administrators, and support staff at your school. Please ask questions on our YouTube page, which we will be carefully monitoring. So before we get started, let's open with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for blessing us today with the opportunity to learn how to better serve your precious children. We ask you to be with our speakers and those attending from all parts of the state. We ask you to be with all students, teachers, administrators, and parents as this new school year begins. We know and trust that you have been and will continue to bless us. Thank you. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I would like to introduce you to today's speakers. Lori Benson-Adams is a dear friend of LASE Specialized Education. We've had her before. We just love her to death. We're so excited when she's here in St. Louis. She has taught in public, private, and homeschooling settings and worked in the field of early intervention private practice for 35 years. She will be sharing her wisdom, her experience, and talent for developing strategies and solutions for students that struggle with anxiety. Also partnering with her is our LASE educational specialist, Mara Springer, who will share observations and trends that she and other LASE staff members have noticed in students and classrooms across our partner schools. As we all know, the last 18 months of COVID have been stressful and have produced increased stress and anxiety, probably with all of us, but especially our students. We pray that this timely topic is a blessing for you. So without further ado, Lori Adams.
And Mara Springer.
All right.
It's hard to read from there.
It is.
Well, welcome. I'll just go through the agenda. What we're going to do quickly today is we are going to be talking about what anxiety looks like in children. We are going to be talking about what we could do in our classrooms, just how we can set up our classrooms and run our classroom and school environment to reduce anxiety for all of us, teachers and children alike. We'll be talking about how anxiety affects the brain and why this is not just an emotional condition, but it's also very much a neurological and biological condition as well. And we need to be respectful of that and treating it as such. And then we'll talk about some kind of staggering statistics about the rise in anxiety, especially in the last couple of years. So.
All right. I have the feeling, oops, we lost our picture back there. There we go. I have the feeling that this is a surprise to no one, but I'm going to say it anyway. When we were working on what would our topic be for the Insight series this year, anxiety was really the only issue that we talked about. We have in our LASE partner schools seen a big uptick in both students who are identified as with anxiety as a diagnosis from pediatricians, but also just kids who are overall more anxious, more exhibiting of anxiety-related behaviors in the classroom. And so we really wanted to talk with you all, our partners, about what do we do about it? Are there things we can do about it? And then how do we work with those kids so that we can bring the most possible success? So you look at this list of behaviors and then you go, well, what's not an anxiety behavior? But really, when we're talking about this, we're talking about changes in behavior. So a child who seemed to be more on an even keel and has become more withdrawn, more careless, and that for an extended period of time. So that's why we say in the last 18 to 24 months, have you seen a change in behavior or an increase in these behaviors? And yes, there are a lot of different things, but again, you're not talking about this lasting for a day. You're talking about this becoming their new pattern or method for behavior. There are a lot of different things on there. You probably won't see them all in a particular kid, but if you start to see 2 or 3 of those things and it's a prolonged thing, that's when you start to have a concern.
Yes. And so just to kind of piggyback on what Mara said, I have the blessing and the privilege of getting to do professional developments all over the country. And what we're talking about today, anxiety is the #1 requested staff development for in-service teachers for the beginning of the school year in services across the United States. So it's easy to understand why this is such a really critical topic. I would like to think that COVID served the purpose of bringing this to our attention, because many children that we're going to be talking about today, their anxiety has nothing to do with COVID. We're just more sensitive to it, we're more aware of it because they've had such a tumultuous last couple of years. For some of our kids, they could have had underlying anxiety issues anyway. So this is not a COVID-related topic. This is just a topic that COVID has heightened our awareness of. So I want to be really clear about that. So when we think about school going back to normal, so to speak, that doesn't mean that some of these challenges that these kids have been experiencing are suddenly going to go, out the window with COVID regulations and such. So just some of the key things to keep an eye on in terms of behavior for kids and some things to notice. And as Mara said, what you're looking for are trends. You're not looking for a bad day, a bad week. You're looking for trends, significant changes in sleeping patterns, big one. Sleeping too much, sleeping too little. Significant changes in eating habits, too much, too little. Increased irritability, is that, I'm a former middle school teacher, so, is that just being a 7th grader, or is that something else that's going on? But certainly in comparison to, right? So one of the things you always look at when you look at these changes are kind of intensity, frequency, and duration, right? How intense are the changes that we're seeing? How frequently are we having these explosive moods or these total shutdown moods? And that's one of the really important things I want to talk about kind of right off the bat, is that anxiety can manifest itself externally or internally. So you can see a child who's biting their fingernails, or you can see a child who begins eating compulsively or something. But what we don't always see are those children that just kind of, they implode. They just really shut down. They're less conversational. They're less communicative. They're less involved in extracurricular activities, those types of things as well. Do you see kids who are kind of shutting out anything extra? Right? No longer interested in youth group, no longer interested in art class, like it's just taking everything I have just to get through the bare essentials of the day, and I don't seem to have that emotional energy to keep going and that emotional energy to do the things I used to be passionate about. Really jumping up and down and all over the place with emotions, can become tearful very quickly, can become irate very, very quickly. Again, tough to tell in those middle school years, right? But keeping an eye on it, and again, as Jackie said, having those conversations. Hey, have you noticed this? Does this seem like this fits within what you're looking at?
And I would just mention too, as with most things, girls are going to be more likely to be your emotionally, the cry easily, have those reactions, or to shut themselves off or become very quiet. Boys are more likely to act out. And so when you are seeing a behavior that's concerning, you need to really put on your detective hat and get out your magnifying glass. And take a look at what's causing this
Your
behavior.
microscope glass.
Your microscope glass, yes.
And so why does anxiety, which is, a neurological and emotional condition, why does that impact academics? How does that impact academics? Well, completely and thoroughly, because as somebody who, we work with children who are unusual learners and have a lot of things going on, but we can tell you pretty definitively that anxiety is the single greatest obstacle to learning that there is, because with an anxious brain is unable to absorb information, period. An anxious brain is not able to receive input. So our awareness of this and our ability to make sure that we're making changes within our classrooms and with our environments is going to be what's going to allow that brain to relax and be available to the learning process. So how anxiety impacts learning, it can often look like inattention, difficulty focusing, difficulty getting on task, difficulty staying on task, right? So a lot of anxiety has to do with what we call rumination, which is you kind of get stuck on something and you circle round and round and round with it. So it may be a perfectionistic thing where you just don't think it's ready, the project's just not ready to turn in. Or it might be just kind of being stuck worrying about a test that's coming on Friday. You kind of get stuck in a cycle of worry, so to speak. If sleep is disrupted, that's absolutely going to impact the brain's ability to learn and be available for learning. I'm having a hard time reading from back there. Change of work pace is a really important one. Changing of a work pace. You used to have a child that was able to get things done, was able to tackle homework, was able to get everything turned in. And suddenly now we're scattered. We can't seem to stay focused enough to get it finished. We do get it finished, and all of a sudden we can't find it. Things that are not typical for that child. Some of our kids, that's their standard way of existing in the world. But we're talking about when kids have differences, when we're starting to see those types of differences. And then another big one is just seeing that things aren't sticking. That is a huge, huge indicator of anxiety. It's just not sticking. The information isn't sticking. They're not hanging on to it. They're not able to retrieve it. They just didn't hold on to it long enough to own it and make it kind of integrated into their brain. It looks like forgetfulness, it looks like inattention, but these kiddos can be completely focused on trying to retrieve the information. They just can't get it. Like, it's just not there. So what are just some very general classroom strategies? So we're going to talk about just some standard things that we can do. Oh, I should probably not be moving. Sorry. What are just some very general things we can do within our classrooms that can help everybody? So there's not a single thing we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides that has only to do with kids who are experiencing anxiety, who have come to you with an anxiety diagnosis, whatever. These are just general ways we can set our classrooms up and run our classrooms to promote better mental health for everybody involved. One of the most powerful strategies that you can use is greeting and checking in with children. There's been this amazing body of research in the last couple of years that has come out that shows that when a teacher stands in the doorway and greets a child by name as they enter the classroom, it can increase on-task behavior by up to 20%, and it can decrease disruptive behavior by up to 40%. That's huge. Like, I don't know too many behavior management programs that right out of the gate increase on-task behavior and decrease disruptive behavior. By greeting a child by name at the beginning of class as they enter your learning environment, you can increase on-task behavior by up to 20%, decrease disruptive behavior by 40%. Why would that be? Just anybody, why would that be?
Ooh, me.
Yes.
One of the things that you're doing is you're making a connection with those kids, and that's so valuable. And it's a connection that has nothing to do with math or science or social studies. It's a personal connection. You're helping your classroom be a safe space. And I'm going to say this a lot today. The safer kids feel, the more likely they are to take risks, the more likely they are to be open to learning new things. But just saying, you know, I'm so glad you're here today. You kind of have to mean it, though, and if you don't, fake it. But it's really important to say, you know, Dave, I'm glad you're here today. I can't wait for you to come into my classroom. I hope you had a good night's sleep. Things that are unrelated to school, so that you're connected to those kiddos. And again, then they're feeling like this is a safe place that I can come and learn.
Absolutely. It's just a matter of being seen, right? You're recognized as a person of value that has nothing to do with your academic performance, right? And that's a pretty powerful thing.
Can I jump in
real
quick?
Jump in whenever you want.
I'm going to backtrack just because we kind of rearranged this presentation. We wanted to make sure everybody got to hear what to do in the classroom and not all the science behind it, because sometimes we talk about the science and then there's 5 minutes of here's what you can do in your classroom. So we wanted to jump into this, but just so everybody is aware, it's a chemical process that happens when you experience stress. Your brain gets flooded with stress hormones. And the more that happens, the less your thinking brain works. The more you're preparing for that fight or flight response. And that makes sense. So forming new memories, processing new information that you haven't had before, those kind of things don't happen well, and if you're stressed out enough for long enough, they don't happen at all. So that's why we're really talking about trying to come into a calm, safe space and make it as calm and safe as you can, trying to make kids feel as comfortable as you can, because we don't want them walking in with their hedgehog bristles already sticking out.
And to tag on to that, in no way are we suggesting that their relationship with you or your environment is stressful to them. Like, a lot of these kids are just coming to you with an anxiety that can be naturally born. It can be part of their genetic makeup. It can be, so we're not saying that, you know, this is because of school or because of academics. But as teachers, we do want to make sure that while they're with us, we're creating the best learning environment possible. Yes?
Hi, we have a question from someone on our YouTube feed is wondering about how what you're saying plays into high schoolers.
It's the same thing. It would be the same thing. It would be the same thing at the Amazon corporate office. Who doesn't want to be greeted by name and have somebody recognize something that's individual to you? That's just a connection. You know, I mean, I can't imagine that any one of us would not want to be acknowledged in some way. So when you're doing that, when you're greeting kids in the classroom, that's not a teaching strategy, that's a human strategy. So that would be appropriate across the board. Now, as a teacher, I will say, I think that's hard to do. I think that's a new habit that most of us would have to really consciously develop, because we have so few free moments during the day that transition of class, the time when kids are changing classes, is sometimes the only time we have a second to check our cell phones and return a parent's email, or the only time we have to run down and get something run off. So it really will require a change in our time management to make sure that we're no longer counting on those little transitions between classes to get our stuff done, that we've changed what we consider a valuable use of that time, and we try to pre-plan a little bit better. So just being aware of, not trying to say that it's just as easy as standing in the doorway. It's no, because you're going to have to figure out how to reuse your time a little bit. But understanding that with statistics like that, 20% increased on task, 40% delay or discrepancy in decrease, thank you, in disruptive behavior. I mean, that's worth taking a minute to answer your emails at another time of day and be able to greet them.
Well, and just think about it too. Don't try and do everything. Pick one thing and develop a new habit with that.
Yes.
And if that one thing is greeting your students at the door, what a wonderful investment. And, knowing those kiddos by name, or young adults, if you're teaching high school, knowing those students by name, greeting them, being glad to see them, and letting them know that you are ready to be there for them. If that's your only habit that you get from this, think about what the statistics say. That's a good time investment. And then once you've made that a habit, then you can think about, okay, now what else can I do? But just add one habit.
Yep. One at a time, whichever one feels right. Another great strategy for working with kids is to develop goals. Teach kids how to develop goals. For some of us, we come here with goal-wired brains. It's almost like we're born ready to know A, B, C, D, E, F, G. For some kids, not so much. Really, goal setting is typically not something that's that's taught. It's something we pretty much think kids will just kind of get through exposure. But start the year by having the kids set learning goals, or any kind of goal that they want. Maybe it doesn't even need to be academic. Set a goal for yourself. Right? Use yourself as an example. So my goal this year is I want to make sure I am in the doorway waiting for you almost every day when you enter my class. That's my new goal. I need you to help me meet my goal, right? So you're using yourself as an example, far less stressful for kids. You teach kids how to break down those goals. You tell them you need their accountability, and you're teaching kids to kind of broaden their mindset, what setting a goal looks like and feels like, but most importantly, what taking steps towards a goal feels like. Because one of the key factors in anxiety is a feeling that you can't elicit change. So anxiety is kind of this, it's almost like a helicopter that's hovering, right? You feel like you either don't have control to make change, or you don't know what change to make. So when we help all kids learn to set goals, and how do you break things down, and how do you make small movements, and how do you know when you're going in the right direction, it's going to be beneficial for everybody, and it's going to be a life-saving tool for some of our kids with anxiety. And there's not a single one of our kids who doesn't have something they want to do faster and easier, not something they want to do better. I mean, we have those goals that we want those for ourselves. So that's a really cool, and that's also a fun project to do, where every so often just put it in your lesson plans to stop and review goals, right? Sit down with a partner, encourage each other, help give them ideas. It also lets people learn to be a little bit more open about what they feel like they need help with. Very important skill as well. Coming up with different ways to provide kids with feedback. Not everything we do needs to be graded, and not everything we grade needs to be recorded. Okay? There's lots and lots and lots, and that's very uncomfortable for some people. So much learning should occur without any kind of high stakes attached to it, right? We should really never be grading during the learning process. We only grade to check and see if mastery has been achieved, right? And mastery occurs after the learning process. You've learned it, and now we've mastered it. Now we can demonstrate we've mastered it, and now we move on. So being aware that not everything needs to be graded, right? Sometimes it can be a check. You did it or you didn't do it. Have kids get involved in giving themselves grades. Take that off of you. Before they turn in a test, say, before you turn in your test, go up next to your name and write down what grade you think you got on the test. What you want to do is you want to get kids into this mindset of assessing their own work, trying to establish if they think they've done their best. Do they need to speed up? Do they need to slow down? Should they maybe have been more prepared? You're trying to get kids in that mindset of kind of looking at their own work. Because a lot of anxiety that does show up at school very much surfaces around grades. And it typically surfaces around concern that grades aren't good enough. So certainly we have to have grades, right? That's part of how our school systems are set up. But not everything needs to be graded, and it doesn't need to be graded before we think the child's close to reaching mastery on it. So just remember to separate the learning process from the assessment process, because those are two very different parts of what we do within our classrooms. Mindfulness. Mindfulness is simply being intentional. It's just, Karen and I were talking about this, about something completely different on the way over here today. Just reminding ourselves to slow down and pay attention. Our brains move so fast. I think teachers are probably some of the top multitaskers on the face of the earth. And sometimes we have so much that we have to accomplish within a day that we forget to kind of be present in the day. And that's not healthy for us long term. It doesn't bode well for long term in the profession. And it also doesn't model good mental health and good self-care for kids. So, it's okay to say, you know what, today we are just going to put our books away 5 minutes early and we are just going to sit and catch our breaths before we go on to your next class. Just remembering to breathe, just really being aware, really tuning in to where kids are and what's going on with them. And that's a reminder on our parts for ourselves. Some pretty interesting and powerful statistics. I'm not going to go through this with you, but I do think you have the handout, and I do want you to have reference to it, about the really powerful impact that mindful classrooms have on overall emotional health of teachers and students, but also on academic performance. By slowing down a little bit, by giving kids a little bit more breathing space, a little bit more room to just kind of catch the breath in the middle of a crazy day, the amount of learning increase is pretty astronomical. So when we think we don't have time to take a break, you need to look at the research that says taking a break is more effective than pushing through. So that's for you to kind of look at your own leisure.
And just because this is a picture with somebody with the Zen yoga pose doesn't mean that
That's
that
not what
can't
mindfulness
be. And that for us, especially in Lutheran schools, that can be time in prayer. But, to just take a 5-minute break and say, get your prayer journal out. This is a time when you can pray for yourself, for others, for your classmates, because that prayer is a mindful activity. And so having some quiet background music and just taking a quiet break and letting kiddos get out their prayer journal, mindfulness does not have to be, yoga pose, Zen meditation. Absolutely, we as parochial Lutheran schools can use that time in prayer, and God wants us to. So go for it.
Perfect. Collaborative activities. I put this one in here because this is sometimes really difficult for our anxious kids. Sometimes anxiety can be socially oriented, and so working with other people is a little bit more stressful. When we do collaborative grading, that can feel like a quagmire sometimes, like you get one grade for the whole group. That can be very stress-inducing. It doesn't mean that you don't do it. There is great benefit in collaborative activities, tremendous benefit. Life is a collaborative activity, right? But being aware that not every child does it intuitively, Not every child does it naturally, and some kids will actually need to be instructed on how to collaborate. How do you work as part of a team? How do you handle not always having your ideas accepted? How are you going to handle it if you stayed up till midnight last night and somebody didn't even do the table of contents like they were supposed to? Those are life activities that are those are life lessons that are far more beneficial than whatever grade goes down in a grade book, right? So really being aware that that's a necessary, but sometimes kind of emotionally loaded activity for some kids. Literature and history as teaching examples. And certainly religious studies, certainly the Bible. Finding real examples of challenges that have been overcome. Finding real examples of when faith has seen someone through. Finding real examples of when all the odds were stacked against you, and yet you still made it, to the Pacific coast, whatever it may be. But our history, our literature, our Bible is full of that. And they're just natural teaching opportunities, not only for the story of that person, but how that person's journey relates to your personal journey, right? And how it teaches our empathy, it teaches some coping skills. How do you think they felt? Do you think they felt like giving up, right? But they didn't give up in what happened. Science is phenomenal for that. Science is absolutely phenomenal. You should tell you. This is
She's
perfect.
saying that because there's a wonderful story in Reading A to Z at about the 2nd grade level about a girl who makes a leprechaun trap, and she gets a C on it, but she takes it home because she just really wants it to work. And she keeps trying to change the bait, and she catches a jackalope, a Bigfoot, and a unicorn, but never catches a leprechaun, and so feels like a failure. And her mom says, well, I don't think you're a failure. Your trap just doesn't catch leprechauns, but look at all the other things that you've discovered. So, something may look like a failure at one level, but be a success on the other. And I often talk to teachers, students, and parents about changing the picture frame that you're looking at something through. Change which window you're looking through. Because yes, this doesn't trap leprechauns, but you found a jackalope, and you found a Bigfoot, and you found a unicorn. So help your kids see, if they're not so great at this, what can you bring positive out of this experience? What did you learn? Change the picture frame, kind of refocus what you're looking at, so that you can find a positive even in something that looks like a negative.
Thank you. I love that story. Journaling, the power of journaling, the power of journaling, the power of journaling. I'm a huge journaler personally, and I believe strongly in the power of learning journals for kids. And what learning journals are is just kids having a notebook, whatever folder, whatever it is, and periodically throughout the school day, you take a moment and stop and give them a second to jot down what they've learned, what they thought was hard, what they thought was easy, what they're curious about, what they want to know more about, and then you move on. And what it does is it builds in both retrieval strategies for kids, consolidation skills for kids, and mindfulness skills for kids. Because when you stop at the end of a class and you say, okay, take 2 minutes and just write down, was it boring? If it was boring, tell me it was boring. If it was interesting, if you think that I was wrong, if you wish that you'd had more turns to, like whatever it was that you got from this, take a moment, think about it, write it down, draw it, whatever, and then let's kind of move on. And then at the end of the day, or if you can't do that after every class, at the end of the day. So what was the coolest thing that you got out of the day? So when I'll tell the story. I always have a special heart for kids of teachers, because God bless them. We do so much stuff to them, right? But I have 3 sons, and so dinners, we got to a point at a certain age where dinners were just really very cumbersome, right? How was your day? Good. What'd you learn? Nothing. It was all these one-word boy answers. So we started doing this thing called best, worst, funniest, and curious, right? What was the best thing that happened? What's the worst thing? What's the funniest thing that happened? And what's something you're curious about? And, we still do that. We still do that. They're 32, 30, and 27 now, and when we get together, that still frames our conversations. We don't call it that anymore, but it kind of taught them to have this broader perspective. And it was especially really good for my middle son, who was kind of an Eeyore. And, there wasn't a lot of happy, funny things in his world for a period of years. And I'm like, oh, no, you cannot tell me you went through the whole school day and didn't laugh at something. Like, there's no way, right? There's always, it's never as bad as we seem to think it is. So the power of journals, giving kids a moment to reflect, giving them that moment of silence, because we are talking at kids nonstop all day long, right? They just need a moment of silence. So the power of a learning journal. The role of exercise. The statistics are there for you to read. I'm not going to read all the fine print on the slides. Please never, ever, 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 ever withhold movement from a child as a punishment. PE, recess. Movement is the number one reset for the brain. It is the number one reset for the attention center and the sensory center. When we withhold movement from kids, we deny them an opportunity to reset their brain so they can come back to us with an increased ability to focus. There is a tremendous amount of research in the area of ADHD that tells us for many kids a very consistent and somewhat heavy exercise schedule can be as effective as medication. That's the power of movement. That's the power of how it affects the brain, rewires the brain, gets things charged and going. Please be very careful about making sure you have enough movement opportunities within the school day, making sure that if you have a child who needs to move, you're giving him an opportunity to move. There are some kids who truly can pay attention better if their body is wiggling. If you tell them to be still, then their brain focuses on being still. If you let them wiggle, then their brain can actually focus on what you're saying. It's the inverse of what happens for most of us, but it's truly how it is. It's hard to see in the light that we have right now, but this is a brain before exercise and a brain after just a 20-minute walk. So that would be what? Couple minutes, couple laps, couple whatever. And you can see how much more of the brain is activated, how much more of the brain is lit up, is available, and is going to kind of show up for what it needs to be doing.
Yeah, so I would rather see a teacher have a kiddo walk laps than sit still at recess. And I'm going to say this in love toward all of you. That includes you. So if you have recess duty, I know, especially here in Missouri, it can be super hot, but if you can find a way to get yourself a little sunshine, a little vitamin D, a little happy chemicals released in your brain, because that's what sunlight does for us, and then some movement for yourself too, because just think about how awesome it would be if your brain was bright red too, and right. Because red is good. So if your brain is ready to be active, so being kind to your own brain is important too. I know we have all had a stressful last 18 to 20 months. And so the same kinds of things that are going to help your students are also going to help you. So finding a way to get yourself up and moving and in the sunshine, it will help your mood and your anxiety too.
Absolutely. And we set the tone, right? We set the tone. It's our classroom. The next two slides are really for your reference. They just give you some acronyms, some basic tools that you can use to help kids who are struggling with emotional control, whether that's anxiety or just having a hard time with their behavior overall. The FEEL approach is teaching kids to freeze, empathize, evaluate, and let go. The calm approach is, that's where we kind of do the deep breathing. Okay, what do you want to see happen? If you can get kids to kind of focus on what would you like to see happen, you get them out of that ruminating of the here and now, and you get them into future-based thinking. Once you can get an anxious mind into future-based thinking, you've already reduced anxiety, right? You've already reduced that being stuck. And evaluating and adjusting. Being the thought detective is with the little, whatever it was, magnifying scope.
Magnifying scope, yeah.
Is getting kids to think about their thoughts. I am in no way suggesting this takes the place of therapeutic intervention, not at all, right? So I'm not saying we step into that kind of therapeutic role at all. But sometimes just asking kids, well, what are you afraid is going to happen? Like, what are you worried about? What do you think is going to happen? Well, I think I'm going to get an F. Okay, so if you get an F, what will happen? And sometimes you can just follow that, just 2 or 3, Mom will be mad. Okay, if Mom is mad, what do you think might happen? Right? Not only do you gain tremendous insight in where that anxiety may be stemming from, but you also get kids realizing at some point they hit a wall and realize the world will not end if I get an F. The world will not end. It will keep going. That's right. And so you go to bed tonight and you got an F, and what's going to happen tomorrow? I'm going to wake up and go to school, right? And so you're kind of teaching that thought process of, okay, so what? Now we move on, right? Worst case scenario, let's go ahead and look at it. Some of us are optimists, some of us are pessimists by nature. But if that happened, then what? And if that happened, then so what? And just kind of getting kids to explore that a little bit more. The Mind Up curriculum is just a resource that I put in there for you all to look at. There are, I think, 4 or 5 different grade levels from pre-K. It used to only go through 8th grade. I think now it does go to high school. It consists of 15 lessons that teach kids about their brain, teach kids about how the brain works, teach kids about what the brain looks like and feels like when it's anxious, what the brain looks like and feels like when it's calm. The more you can teach kids about their brains and how their brains impact their emotions and how it all works together, then the more in control kids feel. They don't feel like something is happening to them. They feel like they're engaging in something that's happening kind of with them. So great resource. It is meant to be an entire curriculum. However, you can get the teachers, just the teachers' guides off of Amazon, and they have amazing lessons that are, I think they're $15. It's a good investment to get you guys the language and some of those background lessons and some of the graphics and things that you can use to talk to kids about their brain. Kids are fascinated, this is the part of the brain where I feel, this is the part of the brain where I plan, this is the part of the brain where I hear. Like, kids think that's really cool. And then you have a common language within your classroom, right? Like, everybody's brain feels like it's a little red right now. Let's try to get it down in the blue zone and let's take a couple deep breaths. But it's a common language that doesn't single out 1 or 2 kids, and everybody is showing increased ownership of
Okay,
good
before
mental
we
health.
do this, just go back a slide so they're not looking at that. Real quick, I'm going to go off book here. There's not a slide on this, so if you're taking notes, I'm going to give you 4 things that you can teach your students. Just about any age level can learn this. 4 things that are just calming, 5 minutes at the most, calming activities. We're going to do square breathing. We're going to do flex and release. We're going to talk about happy place, and we're going to talk about star breathing. So 4 things that you can do. You can teach your students, and you can do this as a group when you're trying to transition, or you can do this with an individual who is having a little bit of a freak out. Okay, square breathing is exactly what it sounds like. You can either trace a square in the air, or if you have a kid who is really having trouble, a piece of paper or a cinder block in your wall. But what happens is, as you trace up, you breathe in. Let's all practice it. As you trace across, you hold it. As you trace down, you breathe out. And as you trace across the bottom, you relax. And what you want them to do, because you're literally teaching them how to change their mind, you want them to whisper or say those words as they do it. So in, hold, out, relax. In, hold, out, relax. And you do that about 5 times, have them whisper it and practice it. Once kiddos learn it, and my 5th grade teacher will attest to this, that's one of those that kids can learn and then do on their own. Okay, the second one, flex and release is kind of fun. I want you to just, even where you're sitting, take every muscle in your body and tighten it and count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Boys especially like this because they can put on a gun show. But again, what you're doing is feeling that release of tension, and learning how to feel that afterwards is a great teachable moment, and it's something kiddos can do on their own. Third thing, happy place. This is a little more wordy, but boys and girls both like it. You have to think of a place where you have been very, very happy. And then you go through each of your 5 senses, and you think about, what do I see when I'm in that place? So if I'm at the beach, I see waves, I see seagulls, I see the sunshine. Okay, what do I hear? I can hear the waves lapping. I can hear kids laughing over here. I can hear the seagulls looking for popcorn. What do I smell? What do I taste if I was eating there? And what do I feel? Like I can feel the sand tickling my toes. I can feel the breeze. So you want to be specific about each of your 5 senses. Again, you're teaching a kid to change their mind and stop thinking about whatever is releasing that stress. The last one, starfish breathing. It is breathing, you spread your hand out like a starfish. Every time you go up a digit, you breathe in. Every time you go down a digit, you breathe out. But you do trace that because you get that tactile sensation too. Some kids really like it. If they don't, then don't put that in your toolbox. But so you breathe in, and you breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out, and then just across your palm. And then you can repeat that. Again, those are 4 very simple, very free, no cost, no stakes, different things that you can teach your students to do. It's another way to take a brain break, but it's a calming brain break. Sometimes we take brain breaks because we've got to get up and move. Sometimes we take brain breaks because we've got to calm down. Again, I taught all of the 5th graders at St. John's this, and they came in and did study skills with me right after recess. And so once they knew all of these, we would either everybody do the same one, or I would say, you have 2 minutes to do your own calming strategy to put your brain dragon to sleep so that we're ready to learn. And they became very awesome at it, and they did a great job. Okay, now I'm ready. I just wanted to give you something awesome. Very practical, very free, easy to do.
Well, and I was thinking, what a cool thing too if you modeled that. If you were like, you know what, it has been a day. I need a starfish. Can we all do starfish for a minute? Because I need it. Right? What a beautiful way to model. And if you're following along, you're already calming yourself down. Like, I just felt calmer watching Mara do it. So, right? So there's some auxiliary benefits there.
All right. So in terms of mindfulness for us, what can we do practically for those kids in our classroom? The number one thing we can do is to be predictable. When you think about when you're stressed out, the last thing you want is a surprise. Surprises are very jarring. So the more that you can be very predictable in terms of consistent expectations, making sure that kids know exactly what it looks like when something is finished. So if it's done, your name's gonna be on it, all the blanks are gonna be filled, it's gonna be in the tray. You know, all those things are consistent. For kids with anxiety, giving them choices or letting them know ahead of time, we're going to be reading in class today. Do you feel comfortable reading, or do you want me to just skip over you? For some kids, that is a huge source of anxiety to have to read out loud in front of other people. So making sure that you are talking with those kids, knowing them, loving them, letting them know that it's okay to be anxious, letting them know it's okay to pass. There are some times when you need to hear kids read, like if you're the reading teacher and it's reading class, yes, they're going to have to read. But maybe for those kids who get really anxious, letting that be a little bit more private. What about pop quizzes? Now, I am careful when I say this, but I'm going to be very honest. What is it that you're trying to measure? Because if a student didn't get a chance to study for it, are you measuring yourself or are you measuring them? And if you're measuring them and you've just given them a surprise, are they going to be able to be successful? I'm going to say something that we said before. When kids don't feel safe, they can't, won't learn as much. They're not going to be able to accomplish as much. So the safer you can make it feel, the better. So I'm going to give you an alternative, and that's called retrieval practice. Again, I used my 5th graders in study skills as guinea pigs, and this was very helpful for them. They kind of knew it was coming every time we met. I used a lot of Post-it notes, but that's okay. Post-it notes aren't that expensive. I gave everybody a Post-it note at the beginning of class, and I would say, last week we talked about X. Give me 3 things that you remember, or tell me what this acronym stood for, those kind of things. But this was never graded. It was just practicing remembering. It's a low stakes, no stakes practice of using your brain. So the kids knew when we started, you are not going to get graded on this. I'm going to give people an opportunity to share if you want to. And everybody had the opportunity to fix their Post-it note. So nobody, if they missed a class or if they didn't remember, we would go through it and I would say, so if you didn't get that, put that on your Post-it note, because that gave them a chance to process it again, write it down, and practice. So working retrieval practice it doesn't have to be every day. It can be once a week, but just giving them a chance to practice recalling, not looking at their notes, not looking at their book. And then after we did that practice, then you could, okay, now look at your notebook and peek and see what else could you add, and then let's talk about it and hear from other people what did they have that you didn't have. But it's a way to have a pop quiz, but A, it's predictable, and B, there's no stakes. Nobody loses. There's no losers when you just do retrieval practice. And it's one of those things that research shows when you get to the cusp of forgetting, but then make your brain remember it, you remember it even better. So it's a great way to help kids bring back to mind something that you know eventually is going to be on the test. Making sure that you post things as much as possible. What are your expectations for behavior? What are your expectations for work? What's the schedule going to be today? Because change is hard, not just for us. For those of you who can't see, these folks are really Lutheran here, and they're back. Nobody's in the front row, and that's okay. You know, we don't change those expectations. We're going to let them stay Lutheran. If you have kiddos who either through a doctor or through some other evaluation have accommodations on an IEP or a 504 plan or something like that, as much as possible, put those into effect before a kiddo fails. It is often, and I have been guilty of it too, our habit to say, well, let's see how they do, and then if they need them, we'll bring these things in. But what you're asking them to do is to fail, and then when you fail, which is hard on your brain, when you fail, then we'll give you help. For those things that we know should be in place already, we should put them in place, and then if the kid is super successful and says, you know what, I don't think I need that, you can fade those out. And that is a much better practice than saying, let's see if we need them. Okay, now. Unless you have something you
And no,
want to
and I'll just add on to that. They've already proven they do need the accommodations or they wouldn't have them. So don't make them prove they need them again, right? They already had to prove they needed an IEP. They already had to prove that they needed a 504 plan. They shouldn't have to prove it again before we activate it and use it. So it's always easier to withdraw something a child doesn't need than try to stick something in and let them be resistant to it and fail first. Oh,
Okay.
nope,
That was right. Yep.
There we go.
Okay, so in terms of helping kiddos in the classroom, some things that you can do with your classroom. First of all, if you know you have an anxious kiddo, I know sometimes we try to be fair by having random seats. And most people, I think I'm preaching to the choir, most people are very intentional about their random seating charts anyway. But if you're not, think about and talk with the child or the child and their parent, especially if you know there is a high level anxiety, about where they feel comfortable sitting. Because sometimes that can be debilitating. If they don't like to be close to the teacher and you put them front and center, that can be very difficult. Or if a child has difficulty feeling like they're trapped, that spiral that she was talking about, if they feel trapped, finding them a corner or a place that is near the door is helpful. Now, when I'm talking with folks with little bitties or younger children, you have to be careful with that because you don't want escape artists to run out the door. So you do have to be mindful about that. But be mindful, and especially when a child can share with you where they feel comfortable sitting, find out and try to accommodate that. The next couple things are just talking about time. And an anxious brain doesn't think as clearly, doesn't think as quickly, doesn't process fast. So if you can give them the gift of time to think, time to respond, you might say to a child with anxiety, we're going to be talking about these different things. I'm going to give you number 4.
Yeah.
You know, let them know ahead of time. Again, be as predictable as possible for them. But that on the spot, having to respond quickly can be really hard. And I can think of things from my own childhood and high school experiences where I was asked something that I wasn't expecting and froze. And I look back on that and I feel like I looked like an idiot. And I don't think of myself as an idiot, but it can make you just freeze like the deer in headlights. And when a kid gives you that look, it's okay to move on.
Yeah.
Don't keep saying, well, if I keep talking to you while you're trying to process this, then eventually you're going to come up with the right answer, because that just makes it worse. If a kid is freezing on you, it is much better to let them calm down and move on. And it's worth it to maybe have a conversation later and say, I am sorry that I made you freeze. I hope that it wasn't a big deal. Is there a different way I can ask you questions or help you participate so that you don't freeze? You know what I mean? Because that's embarrassing for the kiddo too. When they can't come up with the answer. I had a girl talk about last year. She said, I just had a brain fart and I couldn't come up with the answer. And I love that she called it a brain fart. And I said, you did nothing wrong.
Right.
But giving kids either an opportunity or just move on and then talk to them later about better ways that you two can communicate so that they can participate and be successful. Having some kind of calm down corner with little kids or a quiet space or a quiet room available for those kids who really will get amped up. And it's a place where they can do one of those 4 techniques, or they have something soft that they can cuddle, or they can, if you allow it or it's part of their plan, listen to some calming music. All good things. Having a plan in place for what do we do when you don't feel right. And yes, some of this takes judgment. You don't want a kid to milk it and always be leaving your room. So you want that to be the last resort. But it may be that you give them something to take to the office and come back. Those kinds of things. And then You have to use your judgment on this, but again, kids, when they get anxious, their brain kind of shuts down. And so allowing them a 3x5 card of just reminder notes, trigger words, those kinds of things that they can use on tests and quizzes can be really helpful. I guess kids could use that to cheat, but they should have to okay that with you first. But really helping them have triggers, diagrams, those kind of things, it's just a matter of helping them retrieve. And I know for a fact that at least at Lutheran South, there are teachers who let them do that in high school. So doing that in junior high and those kind of things, it's not against the law. You just have to use your best judgment as what's allowable on those cards.
Right. So just a couple things to piggyback on that. The more anxious a brain is, the less language it can process. Say that again. The more anxious a brain is, the less language a brain can process. So talking to a kid about why they're anxious when they're anxious makes them more anxious. The more language you come up. That's why, and what Mara I think is really trying to drive home is that we be really, there's prevention and there's intervention, right? Prevention is taking care of things ahead of time. Intervention is what you do after there's already a problem. We would much rather focus on prevention, right? So teaching kids those 4 calming options during a really good calm day. You're not going to have a kid who's really kind of losing it and then try to teach them starfish breathing. All of these things are preemptive, right? They're prevention. We want to set all of these things in place so if and when you need them, you only need minimal support to remember to access them, okay? So really, really important. And then I think also just to kind of tag on what you said about the processing speed of a child with anxiety is significantly slower because they have to calm themselves down before they can access that kind of academic information. So they have to go, they're running twice as far in a marathon, so to speak. Well, if you have to go twice as far, it's going to often take you twice as long. Number one accommodation for kids with unusual needs is extended time. And there's a reason for it, and there's science behind it, and it's because your brain processes more slowly. So just to kind of, is that you or me? Oh,
I think that's you.
I think that's me. Just a couple things when it comes to working with kids with anxiety, working with parents, working with other teachers. With all due respect, and this comes from a place of love, it doesn't matter whether you see it or not. It doesn't really matter whether you believe the kid has these issues or not. If they're diagnosed, they exist. If the parents are saying they see it at home, it exists, right? You don't get to decide that it should be addressed or not addressed. If somebody comes to you, there's no gold medal for a mom to walk into the school and say, my kid's been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, what can we do to help her, right? There's no like epic Olympic win for that. So if a family comes to you and says that, they've been through a lot to get to that point, and it takes a lot of courage to come and ask for that kind of support. So don't discount it. Don't discount a parent's concern. Don't discount a child's concern. You may have a child ruminating about the fact that she's going to fail a test, and she has never made below a 98, right? It doesn't matter. Her level of anxiety isn't yours. It may not seem logical. It may not seem even possible for her to make below a 98, but that's where she is. So we really have to employ that empathy, right? We really have to step out of ourselves, what we think is real, what we think is valid, what we think is logical, and understand that for that child in that moment, for whatever reason, that's the space that they are living in. Remembering that just because it's easy for us, just because it's easy for the other children, doesn't mean it's easy for that child. And the assumption that it should be easy is often very anxiety evoking, right? So you've often seen that child struggling to tie his shoes at the end of gym class, and the faster everybody else goes, the slower he seems to go, because the more anxious he gets and the more anxiety interferes with your ability to complete a task. So just being aware of that as well. And we're going to skip over some of this, but just so you have a lot of this you have just to be able to go back and refer to. Working with parents, always, always, always respectfully and empathetically acknowledge a parent's concern. You may not see it at school. You can share that you don't see it at school, but be careful not to invalidate what they may be seeing at home. A lot of kids do really well during the school day, and the minute they walk in the front door, they fall apart. And that is because that's a very good illustration of how much effort they have put into trying to do really well during the school day. So you may not see anything, but this mom may say she cried for 3 hours last night over this math assignment, and I know she can do it. Again, no gold medals for mom to come in and say that. So believe her, right? If mom says, this is happening, believe it. I'm going to kind of let you kind of go with how you would do that specifically within a school.
Well, and I was going to say that, and it says up there, and you all know this, communication is key. Being involved in talking with parents, finding out what's happening at home, sharing what you're seeing at school, and making sure that we're on the same page. I know folks who have anybody who has worked with me and sat in on a meeting with myself and teachers and parents and a student, my biggest emphasis is I am on Team Johnny. Whatever, we all need to be on Team Johnny. What we all want is for Johnny to be successful. And so let's talk about how we as a group can make Johnny successful. There's a young lady that we have worked with who there was some anxiety, and unfortunately, in order to get her to come to school, Dad would say, well, go to school, and then if you feel sick, I'll come get you. And she was feeling sick because she was anxious, but the more she avoids school, which is part of the source of her anxiety, and the more you let her escape that, the harder it is for her to overcome that. So needing to meet with those parents and say, we are all on Susie's team. What we want is for Susie to be successful, and we don't want school to be anxious for her. But we also know that she's going to be less anxious if she stays and she gets all the work that she's supposed to get and doesn't have to try and make it up later. So working with parents and kind of trying to make sure they understand that team, that coworker mentality of we're all in this together. We are all on Team Susie Q. We want Susie Q to be the winner. And working with them and trying to find accommodations, strategies, so that kids can face their anxiety without becoming overwhelmed by it, is really important. So communication is key. And if you have a student where that is happening repeatedly, where repeatedly parents are not able to get them to come to school or have to bribe them to come to school, maybe it's time for parents to actually go and visit pediatrician and talk about, and more than just well, we know she has anxiety and self-diagnosing, but talking to the doctor and then trying to bring in a counselor and really work with that child on some therapy, some therapeutic ways to help them deal with their anxiety. Sometimes parents will self-diagnose and they use the word anxiety, but no one has ever talked to a pediatrician or a neurologist. And if you're seeing that as a repeated issue, and it is repeatedly affecting school attendance or performance, then it's time to strongly suggest, gently, lovingly, that we bring in some more professionals. We're teachers and you're parents, but let's see if we can find a counselor who can help us all to make this child more successful than what they are now. Because no one wants to come to school and feel sick all day, but when your child is absent, it's more work for you, it's more work for your child, and it's more work for me. So that's not working either. So trying to find that balance and bring in other professionals to help us all so that we're all successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more anxious the child is, the more anxious their parents are going to be. The more anxious their parents are going to be, the more anxious the child's going to be. So sometimes you do need that outside source to kind of come in and break that up. Anxiety, depression, ADHD, giftedness, and so on. Anxiety can certainly be a standalone condition, and it is for many kids. However, if you have a child who has been diagnosed with a learning disorder, an attention disorder, any type of sensory processing challenges, it's over a 60% likelihood that they will experience anxiety and or depression along with those conditions, okay? So it doesn't mean it's going to be debilitating, right? It just means we need to be more aware of it. We need to be more alert to it. We need to be more, we need to be aware, or we need to be mindful. We need to be on the lookout for it. And we need to be a little faster to work on that. When you have children who have a lot going on, anxiety tends to be kind of one of the last things that we look at, right? So you've got a kiddo who has some sensory processing issues, and he's kind of bouncing from chair to chair and desk to desk and wall to wall. And so we think that that's kind of what we have to address first. Anxiety always needs to be the first thing we address. If you have a child who has ADHD and anxiety, you got to get the anxiety first, because an anxious brain isn't going to pay attention anyway, right? So if you have a child that has anxiety and has a reading disorder, you've got to hit the anxiety first, because an anxious brain can't take on reading instruction. So the anxiety is always going to be the foundational place, and helping parents understand that too, and us understanding that as teachers. Well, if once she learns how to read, she won't be as anxious. Okay, but she can't learn to read while she's anxious, right? So it's that kind of you almost have to triage what comes first, what comes next, and so on. All right, now we're going to do the what. Go.
Well, before we jump into this, because this is really the science and the studies, are there questions either from the internet or from the audience, or is there a student that you're thinking of or a situation that you're thinking of? Well, this happened, what do I do? What should I have done? Or I know I'm having this student and I'm anxious because...
And no names, please.
Yeah, well, yeah, no names.
You guys good?
Anyone? Bueller?
Are you anxious?
Question, story, ahas, anything?
All right.
Okay, go for it, guys.
All
Okay.
right.
So I'm not going to go through a whole lot of these slides, but we did want you to have these for your own personal reference. Why are we talking about this? Why is this the number one topic requested in the United States for teachers returning to school? Because it is the statistics and the rise in pediatric anxiety are pretty staggering. Sorry, not going to go through it that fast. So anxiety is a naturally occurring neurological state. All of our brains have anxiety. If we didn't, we would be smushed in a crosswalk. We would be touching hot water and burn ourselves. I mean, anxiety is what kind of guides our behaviors, it keeps us safe. So it is a very, very critical part of our human makeup. What we're talking about is when the balance is tipped, right? So when it becomes more than just what we need to motivate ourselves. Oh, we've got this presentation tomorrow, we need to review the slides. Or more than just what it takes to motivate ourselves to get done, when it actually spins into a cycle where it prevents us from getting things done, or it significantly complicates our ability to get things done. Anxiety can come from both internal forces and external forces. And this is really a really critical point. It doesn't have to make sense to you. It probably won't make sense to you, okay? The child that is absolutely afraid and terrified and hysterical about going out on the playground because he might get stung by a bee. Okay, now you know that it's the middle of winter and there's snow out there and he's not going to get stung by a bee. That doesn't take away from the reality of him being afraid that he's going to be stung by a bee. So it's not our job to judge the validity of what a child tends to ruminate on or what a child tends to be very anxious about. It's our job to acknowledge it and help them come up with a plan B, right? How are we going to move around that? How are we going to, let's look on Wikipedia. Do bees live in the snow? You know, I mean, whatever it is that you can kind of help move past that. But so it can come from internal sources or very much external sources, right? It can come from the demands of a parent. It can come from a chaotic home environment. It may come from an anxious parenting style, right? So a lot of times that anxiety is passed on. Anxiety can be very genetically driven. So it would not be uncommon that a child with anxiety comes from a parent or parents who struggle with anxiety. So being aware of that, but it can either be an internal source, it can be an external source, and again, it may or may not make sense to you. This is just going to tell you about why we need anxiety in our life. We all need it. What we're looking for is, what is the tipping point? Okay? When do we need to go, I need to look at this a little bit more. So is it helpful anxiety in terms of, is it productive? Is that anxiety productive in helping you move forward, complete a goal, complete a task? So Mara and I met yesterday to go over the slides for today. I don't know that we were anxious, but we wanted to make sure we weren't anxious today. So we went and said, okay, proactive, right? Preventative. What are you going to do? What am I going to do? And then we know that we're both going to talk over each other. But that's good teaching, right? That flexibility. That's helpful anxiety, right? Because it helped us be prepared. It helped us accomplish a task. Problematic anxiety was if I was up all night. If I was texting Mara at 3 a.m., if I got here at 8:30 this morning and tried to get Mara here with me to preview, all right? So it's the degree to which it is helpful versus interfering with other aspects of life. And that's the big one. Is the anxiety interrupting their participation in daily life? Is the anxiety interrupting their ability to attend school? Is anxiety affecting their inability to have a conversation with friends? Is it impacting their ability to accomplish academics? Is it impacting their ability to participate in youth group? Okay, is it impacting their ability to live a rich and vast and fulfilling life? And that is perhaps the largest mile marker. That's the big red buoy out there that I think we can really use that as kind of a predictor of whether or not this is something that we really need to be digging into. Is this impacting from this child, like living large and beautifully? And are we seeing chronic avoidance? Okay, the school avoidance is a pretty extreme example, but then we also have avoidance of, the child always acts up or has a stomach ache whenever they have to do writing, or whenever they have to do math, or whenever they have to. Doesn't say that the anxiety is not real, but it also means that you want to have a conversation with the child's team to decide, how much do we push? How much do we work with? You know, we don't want to always give a kid an out, but we also don't want to push them through sometimes. How do you make that decision? You make that decision as a team. You never make that decision yourself. You make that with everybody who's involved in the child's well-being.
And we We had at St. John's this last year a second grade boy for whom reading and writing was tough, and so he had a lot of tummy aches in the morning when reading and writing happened. And so, you know, the teacher and I worked with him on, I am so sorry you feel that way. And then you do the regular checks of, do you need to use the restroom? That probably sounds familiar, especially younger grade teachers. Would you like to go get a drink? Did you eat breakfast? Going through those things, and you look like you feel okay. We really want you to stay at school today, so let's try and start this activity and then see how you feel. And then kind of give them a jump start into that activity, give them a little bit of assist, and then see if we can't get them moving through the day. And more days than not, he stayed and he was fine once we got him over that hump of the stress of getting started.
Yeah.
So, you know, just being kind and mindful, you know, kindness goes a really long way.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And again, how do we measure, how do we start discerning for ourselves, is this a concern? Is this something I should be worried about? Do I need to have a parent conference? Do I need to be talking to other teachers? Intensity, like how intense are the periods of anxiety? Are they debilitating, or are they just kind of a little self-deprecating? This is hard for me, but they move forward and do it. What's the intensity of it? What's the frequency of it? How often is the child experiencing anxiety to a point where it's impeding their ability to do what they need to do? Duration, how long does it last? Can the kiddo regroup from it, right? So let's say we had this little guy that was afraid he was going to get stung by a bee on the playground. Were you able to kind of get through it and go to the playground and come back and the rest of the day went on? Or did he get stuck in that moment of time and he just wasn't really able to move past that? So what's a child's ability to recoup, to use a strategy and get back on track? You know, what's their ability to kind of spring back? And then depending on their age, what's their ability to participate in identifying what they're feeling, what they're concerned about? I try not to say the word afraid of. What are you afraid of? Because anxiety is not necessarily fear. But what are you concerned about? And then, you know, kind of can they participate in identifying that and beginning to discuss that?
I was just going to say, too, from preschool through high school, it is also true that initiating a new task when you're anxious is difficult. So that idea of helping kids kind of being their kickstart, helping kids get a beginning, get the first little piece on paper is huge. So whether it's a junior in high school or a 4-year-old, helping them get that first mark on the computer or the paper sometimes is a big hurdle that can really help. Mm-hmm. So just helping them through that first step and talking through, well, what would the first step be? Let's figure this out together and get you started. All right, now you keep working on that, and when you get stuck, let me know. So that they get over that first speed bump and can kind of start moving forward.
And a great strategy using that on a test is to, if you know you have a child or more than one child in your class that tends to be, you know, have a test anxiety, be really concerned about that, start with some gimmies, right? The first 3 questions of a test can be throwaway questions. You don't even have to count them. But make sure there's something so easy that everybody in the class knows. And so by the time you get to 4, and it might be a little challenging for you, you already have a mindset of success. You've already switched that inner dialogue from, this is hard, I'm going to do terrible, I'm going to flunk this test, to, oh my gosh, this is ridiculously easy. And when you can switch that message in your brain, you've opened up those gates that make it available to access the information that you know. And you don't have to count the questions, right? And then end with a couple super easy ones so they feel like they ended with at least a positive note. Again, it's not your perspective that matters. I'm sorry, don't mean to be disrespectful. It's the child's perspective. You don't have to understand it. Doesn't have to be logical to you. Doesn't have to make sense. Understanding that anxiety is something that interferes with an individual's ability to connect past, present, and future. So what I mean by that is an anxious brain is a hovering brain. An anxious brain is very much like a helicopter that's hovering. It's not covering a whole lot of area. It's just kind of staying in one place. And so it's not able to kind of think about where it came from or think about where it's going. It's just stuck in the moment. And so that inability to plan ahead, that's why it's often very helpful to think, to disrupt that. What are you going to do when you get home? Or so what if you get an F on the test? Whatever, like trying to get them out of the now into the next step. Or even taking them backwards. Okay, well, let's not talk about the test today. Let's talk about what you had for breakfast. So you're kind of breaking that hover pattern to at least get movement in one direction or the other. We mentioned this before. Anxiety can show up as explosion or implosion. It can be the child that is very volatile, irritable, cranky, nasty tone, or it can be the child that just completely shuts down. I got to tell you, it's the one that's quiet that worries me more, because the other one's at least getting it out somehow. So be very tuned into those overly quiet students. The students who never make eye contact with you, because like if they're not looking at you, then they think you can't see them and you won't call on them. Just kind of be aware of those introverted kids. Statistics on childhood, the anxiety, it's there for you to look at. The statistics are ridiculously high, and these are statistics pre-COVID. There have been no real longitudinal statistics done since COVID, but here are some things I want you to know. Anxiety disorders are highly treatable, and yet only 36.9 of diagnosed individuals seek intervention. That's of diagnosed individuals. So how many undiagnosed people do we have out there who are not seeking? The average age, on average, kids can go 7 to 9 years before some adult says, this is significant enough, we need to look at it. 7 to 9 years. We write it off as their temperament. We write it off as their sibling order. We write it off as 100 other things. It is far better to go see a specialist and have a specialist say, nope, this is within the realm of typical development, than it is to have sat on it and wish you had done it 6 years earlier, right? It's much better to get a rule out, an early rule out, than to get a late rule in. So that's pretty staggering. I think that says that as a whole, as a society as a whole, we don't necessarily appreciate it and respect it. 25% of individuals will at some point experience anxiety to the point where it's considered a disordered mindset at one point or another. Doesn't mean that it's chronic. It can be situational. It can be due to a specific life circumstance. But that's pretty important. It is the most widespread mental health condition, which is why we probably don't give it the attention we need to, because we think it's just part of the human condition. Being shut down is not part of the human condition. Being unable to do the things that you want to do in your life, that is when we know that it's off kilter. Yes, question.
Hi, I have a couple of questions regarding parents.
Parents? Okay.
This was asked, what do you do when a parent is so overwhelmed with their own life struggles that they can't help their child with their anxiety, and the anxiety is really a problem?
Okay, so what do you do when the parent is
so
overwhelmed with their own personal life experiences? Mm-hmm. So I don't know what the role is. I don't know who that role, who this would fall to within your particular school. That's not a teacher role, in my mind. That's a counselor role, somebody that needs to work with the parents to get the parents, to help the parents find resources to support them through whether it's economic or housing struggles or whatever it may be. That is not on you, but you may be the one who starts that ball rolling. You may be the first one who knows both parents are currently unemployed, right? If that doesn't bring stress into the household, I don't know. It doesn't mean that you need to step in and fix it, but it does mean that maybe you have a resource that you can use, or you can refer them to somebody that might be able to help them, if you want to go with that.
Yeah, I would agree. Just helping parents connect with another resource, either within or outside of your school, whether it be through a pastor or a counselor at your church, or if you have a school counselor that you can work with. But I think at that point, it's time to bring another professional in to be involved.
A similar question asks, what do you do with the parent who refuses to cooperate despite a child having a documented diagnosis? Any tips?
Having a documented
Diagnosis.
Well, we can't make a parent. We don't have. We do what we can do within our corner of the world. We can recognize that that child's going to come to us with some chronic stress, because if home is a pretty stressful place and changes aren't being made at home, then that kiddo is going to stay in a pretty chronically stressful situation. But we can double down on wanting to make sure that school is a very, very, very safe place.
And I think that is a time when you really work together as a school team to try not to increase the child's stress level at home. So it may be that that child doesn't get sent home a lot of homework, a lot of assignments, that you try and work within your school system, find that kid a volunteer study buddy, some way so that when they go home, they're only dealing with their parents and they're not dealing with baggage that they're bringing home from school. Trying to, you have to be the bigger person then, and be willing to, as a school, support that child, because you are on that child's team no matter what, and you are still looking for that child's success. We're coming to the end of our time.
Yeah, I know.
So I don't want to butt over you, but
No,
if
no.
there are any other questions,
butt.
comments, joys, or concerns, there are some resources toward the tail end of this. We hope, again, that you come away with one or two things that you can try, add to your own toolbox, and then add them to your students' toolboxes. Find partners, LASE always wants to partner with all of you all, so that's a good thing, but find other partners within your school and within your professional community that can help you support your students, and stay in prayer.
Yeah, our prayer today is that it's raised awareness, it's increased empathy, and we've started conversations. That people are now ready to start having conversations. So on that note, thank you. Go have a wonderful school year. And we're happy to hang. We're going to end things formally, but if you want to speak privately about a child or something, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, I'm done. I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, okay. Then just hit your screen. There. And then we'll be ready for tomorrow.
You're so awesome, Scott. Thank you so incredibly much. You made that so incredibly painless.
There we go.